Leia didn't kneel. She didn't cry. She stood still, hands closed at her sides, her shadow long and solitary against the packed dirt behind the elder's hut. The son waited beside his father, shoulders high with arrogance, lips curled in something between pity and expectation. When Leia said no, she said it once, quietly, but in that silence, something tore. The elder didn't speak at first. His eyes didn't even meet hers. He raised his hand slowly, gesturing not toward her, but past her, to the edge of the camp, where the land became wilderness. The meaning was clear. There were no arguments, no words for refusal. In the old ways, silence had always been law. She left that night with nothing. No food, no blessing, no backward glance. Just the weight of what she had refused, and the deeper weight of knowing she'd be alone now, not because she was unworthy, but because she would not belong on their terms. Days passed. She didn't count them. Her feet blistered and bled. She drank when she could, chewed dry roots when her stomach twisted with emptiness, and each night she lay under stars that did not care who she was. They'd wanted her to become something quiet and obedient, a wife in the elder's house. She would have been safe, respected, even praised, if she had only agreed. But respect that came from submission was not peace. She'd watched too many women shrink beneath the eyes of their husbands. She remembered her mother's silence, her grandmother's silence, their backs bent from labor and compromise. She had said no for all of them, even if no one else would ever say, "Thank you." On the fourth day she saw a fence, rough wood nailed together, sagging in places, lined with buzzards waiting above. A ranch. She crouched behind a low rock and watched. Men moved slowly across the fields, dust in their wake. She knew their kind. Cowboys with calloused hands and sharp eyes, rifles slung across their backs like casual thoughts. Not her people, but not hers to fear either. That night she found shelter in the frame of a burned-out wagon and curled beneath it. She dreamed of her mother, not her face, but her hands. They were always moving, always doing, never resting. In the dream, her mother placed one hand gently on Leia's chest, as if reminding her where her strength lived. The next morning, Leia stood outside a small cabin that seemed less abandoned than ignored. A pale blue cloth hung in the window. A single boot sat on the porch like someone had left in a hurry. She approached without caution. There was no reason to pretend she wasn't desperate. The worst had already happened. The woman who opened the door was not surprised to see her. Clara had seen too many women show up with silence in their eyes. She didn't ask questions. She stepped aside. Inside, the house smelled like dry herbs and old wood. Clara handed her a tin cup with water. No introductions, no explanations. They sat in quiet for a while. Leia did not drink at first. Then she did, slowly. "You're not the first," Clara said almost to herself. Leia didn't reply. She didn't know if she was allowed to speak, or if speaking would mean she owed something. She wasn't ready to owe anyone. Clara walked back to the kitchen, pulled a wool blanket from a bench and handed it over. Her hands were dry, knuckles scraped, hands that had done hard things. Leia accepted the blanket. She didn't say thank you. Clara didn't expect her to. Later, Leia sat outside the cabin, wrapped tight in the blanket, watching a dog chase birds it would never catch. Clara stood in the doorway, arms crossed, chewing the inside of her cheek. She was thinking about her brother, Amos, and how he'd once said that people who refused help were arrogant. But Clara had seen something different in those who said, no. A kind of pain that didn't ask to be seen. She didn't say no because she hated him, Clara whispered to no one. She said no because she still knew who she was. She would never say that to Leia. Some things had to be kept quiet, even when true. When night fell, Clara didn't tell Leia to leave. She simply left the door unlatched, and for the first time in days, Leia stepped into a space that didn't ask anything of her. She slept on the floor. No one told her she had to. No one told her she couldn't. Leia woke before dawn, not to sounds, but to stillness. The kind that settles over a place where no one watches you. No one expects anything. Her body ached in familiar ways, but the ache was quieter now. She sat up slowly, folded the blanket neatly, and placed it back on the bench by the hearth. She didn't touch anything else. Clara had left a small plate on the table, 2 slices of cornbread, and a jar of plum preserves, half full. No note, no explanation. The chair beside it remained pulled out, as if someone had almost sat there and changed their mind. Leia stared at the food for a long time. Then she ate it, slowly. The preserves were tart, almost bitter, but she didn't mind. Bitterness didn't scare her. Outside, the sky turned gold behind the hills. Clara was in the garden, hands deep in the soil. She didn't look up when Leia appeared in the doorway. She didn't say good morning. She simply moved aside, making space in the rows of dry root plants. Leia stepped forward and knelt. Her fingers curled into the soil instinctively. She didn't ask what to do. They worked like that until the sun was too high. 2 women side by side, never speaking, not looking at each other. Sweat dripped from their brows, the kind of honest sweat that says, "This matters. This keeps us here." Inside the house, Clara poured water into a chipped basin. Leia washed her hands and face without being told. Clara laid a clean rag beside her on the table, turned and began chopping wild onions. The smell filled the cabin. It was sharp, familiar. Leia hadn't smelled cooking like this since her grandmother died. She sat down without asking permission. "You used to cook?" Clara asked, still slicing. Leia nodded. "With your mother?" Leia shook her head. "Grandmother." Clara didn't press. She simply nodded back and stirred the pan. The oil crackled. Leia watched the onions brown and didn't realize her hand had gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. Clara noticed. "You don't have to stay," she said gently. Leia didn't answer. She stood up, stepped outside, and walked to the edge of the clearing where the dog was sleeping under the cart. She sat on the ground. The dog looked at her, wagged once, and closed its eyes again. She didn't want to leave. She just didn't know what to give in return, and something in her still believed she had to earn safety. That afternoon, Clara repaired a broken latch on the barn. Leia watched from a distance, then picked up a hammer and helped hold the wood in place. Neither of them spoke. But by dusk, the barn door closed without creaking. In the evening, they sat on the porch with tin cups of coffee between them. Leia drank hers slowly. Clara didn't touch hers at all. "My brother," Clara said, "used to sit here like this. After supper. Never said much. He was like that." Leia looked at her but didn't speak. "He's buried up near the tree line," Clara added almost absently. "Rattlesnake got him. 2 summers ago." Leia's mouth moved before she meant to. "I'm sorry." Clara gave a small nod. "He wasn't always kind, but he meant well." Silence stretched between them again, but this time it didn't feel empty. Later, as stars blinked into the sky, Leia remained seated. Clara stood and gathered the cups, pausing at the door. If you want to sleep inside again, door'll be the same as last night." She went in, left the door unlatched. That night, Leia did not sleep on the floor. She chose the bench near the hearth, still hard, still small, but it held her without asking why she was there. She watched the fire flicker low and thought about the last time she had spoken to her grandmother. Not words, just the way the old woman had placed her hand on Leia's back when others turned away. That memory lived in her spine now, in her breath, in the way she stayed quiet when others expected begging. Leia had not begged to stay. Clara had not asked her to. But something had started to settle between them. Not trust, not yet, but space. And in a world where space was often denied, that was enough for now. The knock came just after midday. 3 slow raps on wood, too calm to be urgent, too heavy to be casual. Leia looked up from the bucket she was filling, eyes narrowing. Clara wiped her hands on her skirt and moved toward the door with quiet purpose. She opened it halfway, blocking the view inside with her shoulder. A man stood there, tall, unshaven, his coat dusty from the trail. His hat was tipped low, but not enough to hide his expression. Part curious, part tired, part something else she didn't trust. "Afternoon," he said. Clara nodded once, saying nothing. "Didn't mean to startle," he continued, shifting his weight. "Just passing through, looking for someone." Clara's posture didn't change. "Not much here," she said flatly. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're Clara, right? Clara Morris?" She didn't answer. "I was up near the Chiricahua Pass. Heard a girl had been cast out. Apache. Young. Walked south. Someone said she might have come this way." Clara kept her hand on the door. "Don't know anything about that." Behind her, Leia stood still. She'd heard every word. She didn't step forward, didn't hide. She simply waited. If the man looked over Clara's shoulder, he'd see her, but he didn't. His eyes stayed on Clara's. "Some folks are looking for her," he added. Clara raised an eyebrow. "Why?" He shrugged. "Something about dishonor, refusal, elder's pride. Doesn't matter much to me. I just owe a favor. Thought I'd ask." Clara's voice remained even. "She's not here." The man watched her for a moment longer, as if weighing whether to push. Then he nodded, stepped back, and tipped his hat. "All right, then. Appreciate the honesty." Clara shut the door before he turned away. Inside, Leia hadn't moved. Clara leaned against the door, her back flat against the wood. She didn't speak. Her breath came slow, controlled. Leia finally asked, "You believe him?" "No." They stood like that for several minutes. Neither one sat down. The air in the cabin felt thinner than before. That night, Clara bolted the door. She never bolted the door. Leia sat by the fire, grinding dried corn into meal. Her movements were steady, but her thoughts ran wild. Why now? How had they found her trail? She'd left nothing behind. No markings, no signs. Someone must have spoken. She looked up. Clara was staring into the fire, her hands clenched in her lap. "You don't owe me anything," Leia said quietly. Clara didn't answer right away. Then, "No, I don't." Silence. "But I still won't give you up." Leia lowered her eyes. "They might come again." Clara nodded. "They might." It was the first time either of them acknowledged that what they were building could be torn down. Days passed. No one returned. But everything changed. Clara taught Leia how to load the old rifle, not with speech, just with hands guiding hands. Leia listened, eyes focused, never asking questions. They took turns watching the fields at night. One stayed near the barn, the other by the house. The dog stayed close to Leia now, curled near her feet, alert to every shadow. Their conversations didn't grow, but their silences became different, shared rather than separate. One afternoon, Leia found a small wooden box under Clara's bed. Inside were letters. Old, faded, mostly unopened. They were from her brother. She didn't read them. She didn't need to. She returned the box exactly as she found it. Later, Clara handed her a pair of boots. Not new, but whole. Leia took them without speaking, and that night, placed them neatly by the hearth, beside Clara's. One pair, then the other. The stranger had not come back. But something else had, a knowledge neither of them said aloud. They would not be left alone forever, and if they were to keep this quiet corner of the world, they'd have to decide who they were willing to become. It began with a sound they didn't recognize. A creak, distant, metallic, unnatural in the quiet. Leia turned her head first. Clara didn't move, not right away, but her hand tightened around the tin cup in her lap. They were sitting by the barn, watching the edge of the hills. The dog growled once, low and uncertain. Then silence returned. Leia stood. Clara followed. No words passed between them. They moved inside quickly. Clara lit the lamp low and went straight to the cabinet. She took out the rifle, checked the chamber, and handed it to Leia without looking. Leia didn't hesitate. She knew what it meant now. Not just protection, but trust. That night, neither of them slept. In the morning, they checked the traps near the garden and found them empty. Not stolen, not sprung, just missing. Clara crouched beside one of the wooden frames. They were here. Leia nodded. What do they want? Leia stared at the broken earth, her voice quiet. To remind me I'm still theirs. Clara looked up. You're not. That was the first time she said it aloud. Leia didn't respond, but she didn't look away. Later, Clara saddled the mule and rode into town. She didn't say why, and Leia didn't ask. The distance between them now felt different. Not absence, but preparation. Each step taken with purpose, for something that hadn't arrived yet, but would. When Clara returned, she carried only two things, salt and a box of bullets. I won't run, she said simply as she placed them on the table. Leia watched her hands, the way they trembled slightly when she pulled the string around the box. That night, they spoke. Why do you help me? Leia asked. Clara didn't answer right away. She stared at the fire, fingers around the cup she hadn't drunk from. Because once, she said slowly, someone looked at me like I didn't belong, and no one stood beside me. Leia waited. It was Amos, Clara said. He was younger then. He didn't hit me, but he said my name like it was a mistake. Leia's eyes didn't shift. I thought if I stayed silent I'd be safe. I wasn't. I was just smaller. They didn't speak again that night. But something inside Leia cracked, not open, but enough to shift the air between them. In the days that followed, they built small defenses, moved heavy stones near the barn to block the wind, but also to make noise if stepped on. Clara taught Leia how to cut glass into sharp points and hide them beneath the windowsills. Not to trap, not to kill, just to warn. Each act was a sentence in a language they didn't speak, a vow made with movement. One afternoon they found a feather on the porch, a red-tipped hawk feather, not fallen but placed. Leia picked it up and held it in her hand for a long time. Then she burned it in the hearth without speaking. Clara didn't ask. The next day, a man rode past the property. He didn't stop, didn't look. but his pace was too slow, his eyes hidden behind dark glass. Clara watched from the barn window, her hand resting on the pistol she kept in her apron now. "We don't cross that line," she said under her breath. Leia turned to her. "Which line?" Clara met her eyes. "The one where fear tells us to become like them." Leia didn't nod, but she understood. That night, they lit no fire. They didn't need it. They sat in the dark together, quiet, awake. And in that stillness, neither one reached for a weapon, because the decision had already been made. If they came, they would not run, they would not beg, and they would not become what had tried to break them. It wasn't dramatic. No hooves pounding the dry earth, no shouting, no warning. Just 3 riders appearing at the edge of the field as the sun dipped low, bleeding orange behind the hills. Clara saw them first. She was feeding the dog by the well. She didn't run. She stood still, wiped her hands on her skirt, and walked inside. Leia was grinding herbs. She didn't ask. She didn't have to. Clara spoke softly. 3. Leia stood, picked up the rifle, checked the chamber. They moved without panic, without noise. Each had their place now. Clara closed the barn door. Leia stood behind the porch post in the shadows. The men dismounted slowly, boots crunching gravel. The middle one stepped ahead. Same man from before, hat lower now, rifle slung across his back. His eyes scanned the front of the house, then settled on Clara, who stood in the doorway, still, unflinching. He stopped 6 feet from the porch, hands visible. "I said I was just asking," he called out. Clara didn't respond. "But I wasn't," he added. "They want her back." Leia stepped into view. She didn't raise the rifle. Not yet. Just the sight of her made the man's lips twitch. "There you are." No greeting, no shame. He looked at Clara. "You knew who she was all along." "I knew who she wasn't." He tilted his head. "This isn't your fight." "It is now." He smiled, slow and patronizing. "Don't make this harder." Leia raised the rifle, calm, not aiming, just holding. His fingers twitched. Behind him, the other 2 shifted their stance. One placed a hand on the butt of his pistol. The wind had stopped. Even the dog didn't move. "You planning to shoot?" he asked. "No," Leia said. He looked surprised. "I'm planning to stay." The words hit harder than any bullet. He stepped closer. Clara didn't move. "You left your people," he said to Leia. "You don't belong here." She lowered the rifle a fraction. "They left me." "And you think she'll protect you?" He nodded toward Clara. "You think white folks will save you now?" Clara answered, voice even. "She doesn't need saving." His mouth curled. "We'll come again." Clara nodded once. "So will we." He stared at them both, long, hard, then turned and walked back to his horse. The others followed. No one looked back. When the dust settled, Clara let out a breath so slow it sounded like smoke. She stepped inside. Leia didn't follow. Instead, she sat on the steps, rifle across her knees. The dog moved quietly to her side and laid its head on her foot. Clara returned with 2 cups of water, sat beside her. They drank in silence. "They'll come back," Leia said. Clara looked at the darkening hills. "Then so will we." That night, they didn't sleep, but not from fear, from clarity. Leia sharpened the knives and tucked them under floorboards. Clara repaired the lantern and oiled the hinges on the back door. They no longer feared being found. They feared losing the version of themselves that had survived this long without permission. By morning, they had rebuilt the fence, not to keep men out, but to remind themselves they were allowed to stay in. The sun was rising by the time Clara found her old sewing kit. She hadn't touched it since her brother died. Leia took the worn apron and repaired the torn strap, stitching in silence. She didn't ask where Clara had kept it all this time. Later, Clara ground herbs in the wooden bowl with more pressure than usual. When she finished, she poured half of the mixture into a small pouch and tied it with red thread. She handed it to Leia. "For the next time." Leia took it gently. There was no ceremony. Just two women, breathing in the same space, claiming it slowly. In the afternoon, Clara found the dog asleep on Leia's blanket. She didn't scold. She smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't bright. It was quiet, like forgiveness, like finally choosing yourself, and being chosen in return. That evening, they walked the perimeter together. No words, no weapons, just a slow path around their world. As they passed the tree line, Leia paused and looked toward the west. Her old village lay somewhere beyond those ridges. She knew they would never accept her return. But for the first time, the thought didn't sting. Clara touched her elbow lightly. A question. Leia turned. "I'm staying." Clara nodded. "I know." They walked on, together, not bound by duty, debt, or fear, just choice. The wind picked up on the fourth morning. Not loud, just persistent. It moved through the dry grass like a memory returning. Leia stepped outside and let it touch her face. She didn't flinch. Inside, Clara was kneading dough. Her sleeves rolled high, hair pulled back with a red thread. Leia watched her from the doorway. The smell of yeast and ash filled the cabin like something permanent. They didn't speak that day. They didn't need to. By noon, Leia had gathered mesquite branches and stacked them near the barn. Clara whittled down old fence posts, repurposing what had once kept animals in or out. The dog trailed behind them, not guarding, just present. Later, Leia opened a small crate near the hearth and found 2 small tin cups from before the war. She rinsed them slowly and set them on the table, side by side. Unspoken invitation. Clara placed a pot on the fire and added wild herbs, salt, 2 thin strips of meat. Neither asked what it was for, but they both sat down when it was done, eating slowly, the kind of meal that leaves silence in its wake. That evening, Clara lit a single lantern and placed it near the window. Leia stood by the door, her fingers grazing the frame. Rough wood, worn by time and hands and weather. She didn't open it, just held it. Behind her, Clara spoke. "You think they'll come again?" Leia turned. "I don't care." Clara looked down, smiled. Not with her mouth, but with her shoulders. Outside, the night moved like breath. Leia stepped onto the porch. Clara followed. They sat. The bench creaked under their weight. No one moved for a long time. Then Clara whispered, "My mother was quiet too." Leia glanced sideways. Clara's eyes were on the trees. "She used to sit here every evening, just like this, before the war, before Amos changed." Leia waited. "She'd hum sometimes, nothing you could name, just sound, low, almost like the earth was singing with her." Leia didn't say anything. Clara leaned back. "I miss that sound more than I miss her face." The porch shifted under them. Leia reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of leather, frayed, folded, worn soft by heat and fingers. She handed it to Clara without speaking. Clara unfolded it. Inside was a tiny bead, Sky blue. Nothing else. She held it gently. Your grandmother? Leia nodded. Clara placed it back, folded it carefully, and returned it to Leia's hand. The wind passed again. They sat like that until the lantern flickered. When they went inside, Clara left the door open. Days passed. Not all were quiet. A rattlesnake took a chicken. Rain came once, hard and brief. The well needed reinforcing. Leia caught a fever. Clara tended her with cloth and tea, wiping her forehead in the stillest hours of the night. When Leia woke, Clara was asleep in the chair beside her. Leia watched her breathing. The dog rested beneath the bed. It wasn't a house anymore. It was something else. Weeks turned. One morning, Leia went to the river, alone. She waded into the water, not deep, but enough. Closed her eyes. Let the cold rise over her ankles, knees, thighs. The current pressed against her. Not hard, just steady. She stood like that for a long time. When she returned, Clara was cutting wood behind the barn. Leia joined her. No questions. One afternoon, a letter arrived. A rider passing through, too tired to notice much. He handed the envelope to Clara. It bore no name, just a charcoal mark, the shape of a bird, wings folded. Clara didn't open it. She placed it in the fire. Leia watched it curl and blacken. No one said a word. By the next moon, Clara had built a new shed. Leia planted 3 rows of something neither could name. They began to laugh sometimes. Brief, low, uncertain, like learning a new language. The porch held their weight better now. They shared one coat when it rained, 2 cups, 1 knife, the same dog at both their heels. And when Clara rose one night, walked to the window and whispered, "I don't want to be alone anymore," she didn't cry. Leia walked to her side and touched her hand. They stood there together, watching the horizon that never asked who they were, only what they would choose next. That same week they painted the porch rail white. The paint was uneven, streaked in places. Neither of them minded. Leia traced her finger along the drying edge, leaving the faint imprint of a swirl, almost a pattern, almost a signature. A hawk circled overhead once, then vanished. They heard nothing more of the riders. No more letters. No more footsteps in the brush. But neither of them called it peace. Peace wasn't the word for what they had. It was something quieter, something earned. Clara began planting morning glories along the side of the house. Leia laughed the first time one bloomed blue, just once, just barely. The sound startled them both. That night, Clara found an old music box buried under tools in the shed. It didn't work, but she wound it anyway, holding it in her palm while they sat on the steps. "I used to think it would sing again," she said softly. Leia looked at her. Maybe it already did. No answer. But Clara didn't put it away, and Leia didn't look away. When they closed the door that night, they didn't bolt it.